The Tuareg, indigenous people of the Sahara, the world's largest desert. A people isolated from the state, whose pastoral way of life is dying from drought. A people who have the world's lowest quality of life, who risk being buried alive to obtain water to drink. But the Sahara is not poor. The Tuareg homeland, divided by colonial history, straddles the largest energy deposits in Africa, in southern Algeria, southern Libya, and northern Niger. Northern Mali is the least explored area. In January 2012, Tuareg rebels in northern Mali launched a war of independence to separate from Mali and create a new nation in the Sahara called Azawad. Their goal, to govern their own land and use its resources to improve the lives of their people. But the war created an opening for Al-Qaeda to emerge from the Sahara and fight for a competing vision, an Islamic emirate in the desert ruled by Sharia law. Mali was battling two different heavily armed opponents, secular Tuareg rebels and Al-Qaeda, losing its grip on the desert north. Malian soldiers were captured in the hundreds. Poorly equipped and hungry, some sold their weapons to the enemy to buy food. Sent by their government to fight and die in distant deserts, crushed by the Tuareg, in a land far away from home. The carnage angered the people of the South, especially the army, which is led by the Southern Bambara tribe, who dominate Mali's army and government. Southern Army officers staged a coup in the capital to protest being forced to fight in the north.
Bonsoir, compagnons d'armes. Bonsoir à tous nos citoyens. Et je suis le capitaine Sanogo en personne. Et je suis là en bonne et due forme.
Within hours, the president abandoned his palace. Junior officers had southern Mali under their control.
The United States condemns the military seizure of power in Mali, and we stand with the illegitimately elected government of President Amadou Toumani Touré. Mali has been a leading democracy in West Africa, and those institutions must be respected.
The world condemned the coup, but Malians didn't look sorry to lose their president. Mali had been sold by the West as a model of democracy for Africa. But the speed of the entire country's collapse told a very different story.
Just day or a day, you know, I came in charge. It was me and my guys. I still be captain, but don't see me as a captain, but as a chief of state. I know for this coming time, I'm gonna be under pressure. But my feeling was what? I get a satisfaction. This satisfaction was about what? Because my people, I save it. I save it. You can feel it in Malian eyes, how I save this country.
But Mali was far from salvation. Within hours of Sanogo's statements, all of northern Mali fell to Tuareg separatists and their al-Qaeda rivals. The Mali army fled south, abandoning its bases and weapons to the enemy. Al-Qaeda rolled victorious into Timbuktu. And the Tuareg separatists into Gao, the largest city in northern Mali. The Tuareg rebels now controlled an area larger than France, encompassing all of Mali north of the Niger River bend, a territory which they called Azawad, their new Saharan state, with the city of Gao as its capital. In northern Mali, most Tuaregs were ecstatic. To them, Azawad meant freedom from decades of rule by a distant state that marginalized and oppressed them. As the Tuareg rebels overran airports and bases, they could scarcely believe what was happening. Not since the French colonial conquest of the Sahara had they controlled this land. For the first time, raising their own flag. Their veteran commander, Meshkinani, is the fourth generation from his family to rise up against Mali and its forerunner, colonial France.
الناس كندا عندنا تاريخ عريق ومرير، لا تاريخ عريق ومرير. دغه فرنسا حاربناها، فرنسا نكنس دسون دغه تزدر فرنسا. إيتك فرنسا اللي هند ورنا قبل الاستعمار، وهار تزدر فرنسا استجر فرنسا لا تسلمي مالية قالنا بالمعاهدات. منذ هذيك الوقت نكنت انتهى حوال وركلا جوات اي 10 سنين سودا نحول الثورة جديدة.
For Meshkinani, the victory at Gao was bittersweet. It was he who'd led the failed effort to take this place 20 years before.
هذه السجن اللي كنا فيها في سنة 90 من قبل السلطات المالية. هذه الأسماء تاعنا، الأسماء توفوا أصحابي هنا من التعذيب، تحقيق بالضي بالتريسيتي، وما يشربوش والضرب.
Meshkinani and his separatist rebels, the National Movement for the Liberation of Azawad, or MNLA, had taken the largest military base in northern Mali. A base whose primary purpose was to control the rest of North and prevent a takeover like this. But while the MNLA rebels savored victory in Gao, right outside their base was looting and chaos. The MNLA may have won the battle for northern Mali's largest city, but they had no idea how to secure its peace.
كارثة كبيرة يعني في مدينة غاو. هناك اغتصاب للنساء وكذلك يعني نهب الأموال، وكذلك ما توجد يعني دور يعني الاستشفاء، ما في مستشفى، ما في أي شيء. وحتى هناك الذين يقومون يعني بالفوضى، بعضهم يعني من سكان مدينة غاو، والبعض يعني ليسوا يعني من حركة يعني الأزواد، إلا أن الناس يعني يتهمون الأزواد الحركة يعني أعضاء الحركة، لماذا؟ لأنهم هم الذين يعني دخلوا هذه المدينة.
The Tuareg are only one of several tribes in northern Mali. While they are a majority in the Sahara, in towns of the Niger River bend, other tribes outnumber them. The Songhai and Fulani peoples are the majority in Gao. And many of them saw the MNLA as the occupying army of a rival tribe.
Nous, les peaux noires ici, on ne va pas se laisser commander par d'autres personnes parce qu'ils ont pris des armes, qu'ils vont nous gérer ici.
Human Rights Watch documented rapes allegedly committed by MNLA rebels. Local leaders denounced the group. If Azawad meant being ruled by the Tuareg, they wanted to stay in Mali. And Tuareg separatists weren't the only rebels in Gao. An al-Qaeda affiliate called the Movement for Unity and Jihad in West Africa, or Mujao, had also fought to win the city. And they had a radically different vision for northern Mali.
أصحاب القانون هربوا معهم قانونهم وطردناهم ومسكنا أسلحتهم واستولنا عليهم ونحن نكفر بهم وبقانونهم لا نؤمن إلا بالقانون السماوي الإلهي وهو الذي نؤمن به ولا نعترف بأي حدود سوى ذلك لا نؤمن بأي حدود سوى حدود الله تعالى.
Mujao challenged the MNLA's claim to the right to rule, imposing Sharia law in Gao, banning evils like alcohol. Brazenly, Mujao kidnapped the Algerian consul to Gao and 6 of his staff, right in front of Al Jazeera's cameras. The MNLA controlled precious little in Gao, their supposed national capital.
جماعة توحيد الجهاد مثل الجماعات الجهادية التي تسعى لإقامة الدين هي تجاري هذه الأنظمة لإعادة النظام الإسلامي على هذه الأرض، وبالتالي لن تقبل بأي إدارة سياسية أو عسكرية في المنطقة بطبيعة الحال.
To bolster their numbers, Mujao convinced al-Qaeda fighters in the Malian Sahara to come join them in Gao, including the brigade of one-eyed commander Mukhtar Belmokhtar, who would later claim the In Amenas gas plant attack in Algeria. Local ethnic militias also flocked to join the group, swelling Mujao into a tribal army capable of challenging the Tuareg. Now, if the Tuareg rebels moved against Mujao, it would trigger all-out ethnic conflict and a street war with al-Qaeda.
لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله إما النصر وإما الشهادة.
Holed up at an unmarked villa, with al-Qaeda lurking just outside the door, the MNLA commander of Gao had a bad feeling of déjà vu. Colonel Yeslot was once a top officer in the Mali army in charge of a Gelhak, a Tuareg town deep in the desert where for 10 years al-Qaeda operated openly. When the colonel asked for permission to expel the Mujahideen, he says the army ordered him to leave al-Qaeda alone.
مالي هي التي زرعتها في المنطقة، فتحت الأرض على مصراعيها للقاعدة، تتجول بين المخيمات، تتجول بين القرى، تبني علاقات تجارة أسلحة مع أشخاص، اعتقاداً أن وجود هذه المجموعات سيؤثر في الحركة المستمرة، حركة الطوارق أو تمرد الطوارق المستمر منذ 50 عاماً ضد نظام الحكم يعني.
These MNLA fighters were living in Agelhak, where they say Al-Qaeda were allowed to flourish as a counter to Tuareg rebellion.
أواجه رجله كفوك النيت الزايق نرداشن دغا ما سنغرم هنيتن الحكومة مالي مشانة وهسنجرن هارت وتنتظر درنغنا كان يضيرنا نكلا كالهارت رداشن دغا جله سم كواسر هن لا ريلاسيون تندد نتا جني هنا سم كواسر هن سون دغا سدينتنا دينتنا كال جروني ليبرتي أرداشن الناس وين تزوي الناس وإذا تفرن أرداشن تني ولا الحكومة الناس الني ولن تي وسن ولادي هذا ولا باس تمتي تغزان الدقاوي جنين زوزانا سنت السنت اللارن وشمرت اللي ريسني جنين
مالي لا تخاف من القاعدة، تستفيد من القاعدة. ليست عدو. العدو الرئيسي لحكومة مالي هو تمرر الشمال، الطوارق. نعم. نعم. هذه هي العقيدة التي بنيت عليها دولة مالي. إن العدو الوحيد لما يسمى بدولة مالي هو الطوارق. لأن الطوارق منذ البداية تعلم دولة مالي أنها أضاعفت أرضهم تواطؤاً مع الاستعمار الفرنسي.
Across the new Azawad state, young men were flocking to the training camps of the MNLA. Four times since 1963, the Tuareg have risen up against Mali. A march of generations. With 1,000 faces and many incarnations, but always the same goal: self-determination. Abandoned by governments, rebellion became the culture of a people.
أخلاق قلق متمرد فلا سؤال من الناس فلولي لا مش من الناس ولي لا المرجعين ولي لا كليم ولي لا هرتي متمرد نك قلق متمرد هرواز ذكر ورق متمرد وواعد أحمال أعضاء الجنسية نك على الناس غاس الناس ورك الأفضل راس قلق متمرد الوالدة الله غنم بشير سبعة رحمهم الله لا صنع التمام براهين نستعين بنفسي دائما لأني لما أرى لمن أستند لا أراه فالكل ضعفاء.
This is the army of a people, orphaned by poverty, disease, and war. In the desert, there are few hospitals, schools, or jobs. Most forms of economic activity are illegal.
تقريبا الناس قشق الشواغل الناس كلاك ناس قشق كنا سنة الناس قشق قلق فرنتي تنيتور في نقل جدا الناس جماعات ندينا تسول السنة جاية ما قال الناس فالناس قشق الشواغل من نغن تمضين قشق الشواغل وين أبلغ نقشق وين السوق هيبو الناس قشق تهريب نفسي لها تسواتين المخدرات الشاركة نقصنا تدينا تقريبا أو هارتنا نغت عمرني المسم الناس أجرونا قالنا نغدت دجوانا قال أمر هيا رغس تخلص سندار غسان قالنا لو ساخ سندي دجوانا دغنا أقل مسم النساء لو ساخ نقل مزبلة يتي لا لباس المسم النساء أدى اجتهاد.
From the checkpoint that leads into Gao to the new villas lining the streets of High Cocaina, the cocaine quarter of town, the city of Gao marks the terminus of Mali's last paved road. From here north, there is only the vast desert of the Tuareg and Arab people. Where planes drop illicit cargo and armed caravans track the Sahara, many carrying drugs for Europe and the Middle East, estimated at billions of dollars worth each year. The leaders of Mali's rebellion say drug smuggling became a source of funds to control the rebellious north for a poor, corrupt state without the will or means to develop the region.
مالي كونت مجموعات مسلحة هسنا ميساد غنين الشغل صغص سكورت دروغ فهمت تمام دروغ تنين هي جروا لسه بورسنتاج الناس أزر فوان دروغ أنت سمون ميليشيات تيا خير بنين الثورة أكفن دراغ الشباب نسن أقال ميليشيات ميليستن يا خارب عندها رجولي إبراهيم أكبهانجا أردت أن هي أرود سسنيو فنكلا أزواد ورتي الله هرت موسن تزونا وين سوجا استعملت الحكومة وناتيتي أوين دغا إلى بريسيون تدغا بالطور وتنفجار.
Between Al-Qaeda and drug trafficking, poverty and tribal strife, northern Mali had finally imploded. And from their seat of power in Gao, the region's new Tuareg president said Mali's mismanagement of the north had brought the entire country down.
مالي فشلت في منطقة أزواد، لم تؤمن للعالم الأمن، لم تؤمن للأزواديين التنمية، لم تؤمن لنفسها الاستقرار. إذن ما الداعي من الحديث عن وجود ما زال قوة أو سياسة مالي في منطقة أزواد؟ سياسة مالي في منطقة أزواد لا يمكن أن تنفخ فيها الروح اليوم. حتى وإن قلنا لمالي أرجع، مالي لا تستطيع أن ترجع، مالي ليست لها مقومات سيطرة على أزواد.
The powers of West Africa were deeply concerned. How would they wrest the Sahara back from the Tuareg? Could this breakdown of post-colonial order spread? And which was worse, the separatists or Al-Qaeda? The only thing they knew for sure, Mali was incapable of fixing the mess. Meanwhile, from their darkened capital in Gao, internationally condemned, surrounded by Al-Qaeda, the Tuareg declared a new country in Africa.
I was just there as a tourist. I was busy with a motorcycle tour down to South Africa, and Timbuktu seemed like a good place to go and visit.
Stephen Malcolm and his friends were kidnapped by Al-Qaeda in 2011. To this day, all three men remain in captivity in the Sahara.
Just say to my wife that I love her very much and that I miss her like crazy. And I really hope I get to go home soon.
For 10 years, northern Mali was the world's biggest hostage market. During this time, over 50 Westerners were kidnapped in the region by Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, then brought here to the Malian desert to be hidden, each ransomed for millions of dollars. Money often secretly paid by Western governments.
My family, we don't have money. I don't know. I will just ask the government again, please help me. But somebody must help me. Somebody with human feelings.
The ransom payouts from the West helped finance the rise of Al-Qaeda in the Sahara, providing the group with an estimated $200 million. The deals were officially brokered by the Malian presidency, and former hostage negotiators tell Al Jazeera Malian officials at the highest levels received a large cut. For the Malian state, Al-Qaeda was the goose that laid the golden egg.
The President and I spent a fair amount of time talking about the dangers of radicals and extremists associated with groups like Al-Qaeda.
Regional governments repeatedly warned U.S. diplomats of Malian complicity with Al-Qaeda. But in Washington, no one seemed to be listening.
One reason we've worked with the government is because they've agreed to fight corruption and support the education and health of its citizens.
Mali received hundreds of millions of dollars from Western governments to fight Al-Qaeda and develop the desert north, and did very little of either.
Je serais uniquement venu aux États-Unis pour dire au président Bush merci. President, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Now, the blowback from Western policies in the region was about to be seen by the world. In a place synonymous with remote mystery, because for centuries, every Westerner who tried to reach its gates was killed. For a time, Europe knew more about the surface of the moon than it did about Timbuktu. Now, Al-Qaeda was running the city, and once again, it was closed to the West. After years waiting like a ghost in the dunes, Al-Qaeda had taken a major African city. As early as 2001, bin Laden had chosen this region as a strategic base for Al-Qaeda in Africa. And to take command of Timbuktu's security, Al-Qaeda had chosen a son of the city. Talha was driven into exile as a child by the Mali army.
عائلتي تركت تمبكتو لأسباب أحداث قديمة حصلت في سنة 90. هو الصراع يمكن يكون ما اليوم نروه معنا كجبهة تحرير أزواد، هذه معنا نضال لتحرير أزواد. الشعب الأزوادي عامة من العرب ومن الطوارق ذهبوا في الأرض معنا، ساحوا في الأرض معنا، نجا بنفسه كالمذابح التي حصلت. كبرت في ليبيا وأتيت، والآن الحمد لله أتيت إلى مدينتي معنا أصل.
Al-Qaeda brought order and security to Timbuktu, creating an Islamic police force, staffed mainly by Tuareg from Ansar ad-Din, a local rebel group closely allied with Al-Qaeda. Most were illiterate young men from poor desert families. Some had fought in earlier rebellions, others uprooted as children by conflict with Mali, the offspring of defeated peoples and failed nationalism. Now, they had a new mission: to establish Islamic law and root out evils like alcohol and cigarettes under the supervision of their commander, Talha. Talha would rise to become emir of the largest al-Qaeda brigade in the Sahara. A journey that began in 2006 when he returned to Mali, and al-Qaeda assigned him to a recruiting mission throughout West Africa.
ذهبت الكثير من الدول الجوار مثل النيجر ومثل الجزائر ومثل بوركينا وغيرها من المناطق، حتى نيجيريا، ذهبت إلى نيجيريا. نحن كنا نبحث عن حل معنا لتحريك الأقليم أكثر من أن تكون مجموعة صغيرة أو مجموعة خلايا أو شيء من هكذا. تستطيع أن تكون خلايا أو أنت يكون معنا، يمكن يوجد كثير من الضعفاء معنا ما وصلهم شيء، لكن تستطيع أن توصل لهم كتبليغ معنا للمسألة والله كدعم أو شيء منها.
If al-Qaeda were looking for the weak, they had come to an ideal place. This vast region, where the grass stopped growing and hunger stalks the land. Abu Bakr walked 2 days from his village to sell his sheep in the city and buy his family food. The animal collapsed on the way, and Abu Bakr is close to collapsing too. Here on the edge of the desert, people try to sell their animals before they die. The southern rim of the Sahara is the front line of climate change. The desert is expanding, and the rain is disappearing, leaving people who've done nothing to pollute the earth, a dying land that can no longer sustain life.
وجرتنا وتوارق قد فانت ناكشلسي إبادة نجرب ناكشلسي تيتتي وتيتلا وتيلا غداكش أخي.
Desertification has driven hundreds of thousands of people from this region into a choice between starvation and exile, ignored by their governments, abandoned by nature itself. In the Sahel and Sahara, hunger and malnutrition are chronic. And in northern Mali, they're made even worse by instability and conflict. At Timbuktu Hospital, known members of al-Qaeda like Sanda were ever present, ready to offer aid to the worst affected. In northern Mali, al-Qaeda transformed itself into a humanitarian NGO, providing medical supplies and food.
طالبنا العالم بالقدوم لمساعدة هذا الشعب المنكوب، وقليل هم من أدى النداء. أما أن أكون من القاعدة أو أن لا أكون فهذا بالنسبة لي، المهم أن أكون مسلم أسعى وأبذل قصارى جهدي لأن أكون ممن لبى نداء الله سبحانه وتعالى وأن أقيموا الدين ولا تفرقوا فيه.
On Friday, the Muslim holy day, worshippers flocked to a mosque run by Al-Qaeda, turning the streets into a parade ground for mujahideen from all over North Africa and the Sahel, drawn by this beacon of Islamic law.
مولانا جل وعلا أمرهم بالالتزام، أمرهم بالالتزام بالحجاب الشرعي، عنهم ما يخضعوا بالقول، لا يلينوا الكلام، وعنهم ما يخبطوا كرعيهم إياك يتكارروا الخلاخل، وعنهم ما يظهروا زينتهم، وعنهم يضربوا عليهم جلابيبهم ويدرقوا بها أجسامهم كاملة. الله أعلى وأجل.
On this Friday, the sermon was delivered by Abu al-Bara, one of Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb's top Islamic scholars.
شو يقولهم مولانا؟ يقولهم وقرن في بيوتكن ولا تبرجن تبرج الجاهلية الأولى. عاد اليوم والعياذ بالله العلمانيين واهل الاهواء واهل الضلالات يقولوا عن وقرن في بيوتكن ذيك اللي قال مولانا، عاد والعياذ بالله يقول عن هذا سجن المرأة، وهذا تقييد المرأة، وهذا قليعة حريات المرأة، وهذه المرأة ما طلعت عندها حرية. أنتم أعلم أم الله؟
Abu al-Bara led fighters in tearing down the tombs of saints in Timbuktu, in an area designated by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site.
من المعلوم أن الشريعة السمحاء أمرت بتسوية القبور الزائد رفعها عن القدر الشرعي وهو شبر، وهذا خوفا من تعظيمها واتخاذها أصناما تعبد من دون الله، كما هو الشأن عند كثير من يجهلون حقيقة هذا الدين.
Many in this historic capital of Islamic scholarship were afraid and confused. The Sufi Muslims of Timbuktu, unsure how to live their lives under Al-Qaeda's rule. The people of the city could do nothing but watch.
طبيعتهم وطبيعتنا ما هو واحد. المدافع ما نعرفه المدافع والرصاص والنار على راسه رقاج كل ليل وكل نهار، نخافوا منه ما نعرفه. الشريعة اللي جانا على الشريعة اللي نعرفه نحبه، العاد ما هو على هذا اللي نعرفه ما نحبه. والله إلا محبوسين حق.
شو بدك؟
But some people were glad to see the Mujahideen, like Tuareg families who'd lost their traditional herding way of life, now living in slums in the city.
وخشادي دغنا نبرزي اني بانا نشك شاي هراوني دغدا دالون نقشد يشكرا شقشد ايوا سالد وتلات تلان اجن يمن تودوس الصوهي ارغاوي لقد من ادنتي هرتي يعني سليتاوي وتلينا امان.
Fatima too says Al-Qaeda are feeding her family.
أدقنت كوتا وين هارا نقرأ داسنت أنا تغاسل لقد دوسنت الدوسن جا نقرأ داسنت نهاي داغا أواس طاراتين السلسن تنت سوغلن تنت إذا وارن فكوري لا تيل السنة لمن الناس من النمسن أغباه السلسلة ما أنا نقدا نقيم غاس دي هارا اسم السينا نقيم غاس اسم السينا ون لاوا سليت مسينا.
After 10 years in northern Mali, with millions of dollars to spread, Al-Qaeda and its affiliates had finally drawn recruits away from the secular Tuareg rebellion.
هناك هرتوا نهاية على نصر الدين هلان المساعدة تأتي الشعب هم التكان تيمو الدنيا قلت ما شق مغاترنين العالم غرد نسودين قلت ما شق الدنيا غرد ومغاترنين تيسنتيد هاك يهاكين يتاتيكو تاوين يهاكي جوهلن دي زورفلان في مدينة تساليد نهاية جوهلن وين دعنا نغرم من الغرب نسن سدوت ند الفقي واتي لني هنا تمزقداتين دا يكفين هاكي أنا أزرف ورد اسم جرو هاكي يكفي دي 100,000 دينار الجزيرة هاكي حاجة جميل.
A 1,000 years ago, the Tuareg founded Timbuktu, and all the tribes of Mali built it into one of the wealthiest cities in the world. When the French came to conquer the Sahara, from Chad and Libya to Niger, Mali, and Algeria, no one fought them harder than the Tuareg. Here, just outside Timbuktu in 1894, the Tuareg massacred an entire French column, putting 76 men in their graves. French reprisals wiped out Tuareg tribes, slaughtering all their animals. The French paraded the severed heads of Tuareg leaders and groomed tribes deemed less troublesome to assume power upon independence. At the courthouse in this town, locals say the Malian judge warned Tuareg defendants by producing this skull, saying it was the severed head of a Tuareg. Many feel the Malian state is simply an extension of rule by the French. Now, Tuareg camps in the desert greeted MNLA rebels like heroes, freeing them from a state they never consented to be part of. And in the city of Gao, the MNLA were about to take a revolutionary step. The inauguration of a national government for Azawad, a state demanded by Arabs and Tuaregs before Mali's independence, but denied them by the French.
تشكيل حكومة الأزوادية من طرف الأزواديين خطوة تاريخية مهمة جدا، إن يعبر عنها الشعب مسيرة تعبر عن الألم، ألم كبير جدا في الشعب الأزوادي اليوم يحاول أن يغسل ذلك التاريخ وذلك الإرث وذلك الماضي الدفين في المتمثل في الاحتلال والتهميش.
The Tuareg claim of a state was becoming a fact on the ground, and Mali and its neighbors were deeply alarmed. An Azawad state could spark Tuareg separatism across the Sahara, a prospect more threatening to regional order than so-called terror. Now, outside the ceremony for Azawad, fighters from Al-Qaeda and its affiliates were moving into position. Next episode on Orphans of the Sahara, Tuareg rebels move to take back the natural resources that underpin the wealth of a world power. Al-Qaeda hijacks their victory, and an old colonial master comes out from the shadows.